Howdy, Full Metal Cowboy, straight shooting a review of Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. This film is a reimagining of Dario Argento's 1977 cult horror classic of the same name, and this film stars Dakota Johnson and Tilda Swinton. Out of all the films that came out this autumn, Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria was the one I was anticipating most. There weren't really that many films I was interested in this particular season throughout 2018. And I did see the teaser trailer for Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, and I was legitimately creeped out. There is another reason I was anticipating this film, but I will talk about that soon. Now, when the reimagining of Suspiria was announced, of course there would be a group of devoted fans that would say stuff like, Suspiria is a masterpiece of horror and Dario Argento's magnum opus. This should have never been remade. I gave it a 9 out of 10, and I never claimed it to be a masterpiece. Now, it is gorgeously shot and the soundtrack kicks ass. Now, those 2 points I can agree to. After having seen the original Suspiria, there were plot points that I think could have been fleshed out better because they came off rushed to me. And that was the one aspect I was hoping that the reimagining would improve upon with the original. And this film is the complete opposite of the original. This film takes its sweet time. Now, the most important thing you need to keep in mind regarding this film is that Luca Guadagnino intentionally made this a completely different film from Dario Argento's original 1977 cult horror classic. And this is something I can greatly respect Luca Guadagnino for. And because of this intention, it gives Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria its own identity separate from the original. While at the same time, Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria has been receiving a polarizing reception. Some people really love this film, some people hate it. One thing's for sure, I could not keep my eyes away from Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. For the most part, it is shot very well. I loved many of the interior shots that were filmed in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. Now, while the cinematography for the most part is outstanding in this film, there is slow motion in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, and all I could think of every time it occurred was, why? Why even have slow motion here? And after thinking about it, I do question, what was the point of slow motion in every scene it was used? I found all the slow motion uses unnecessary. Allow me to demonstrate what the slow motion looked like. This is me putting in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles in my Blu-ray player in a normal frame rate. Here is me putting OK Computer by Radiohead in my Blu-ray player with dramatic slow motion. And here is me putting the bonus disc of the OK Not OK edition of OK Computer by Radiohead with choppy slow motion. What the hell? And I have a good excuse as to why I'm mentioning this album again and why I'm wearing this t-shirt is because the film score to Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria is done by Thom Yorke, lead singer and frontman of Radiohead. Yeah, I know, no surprises here. Thom Yorke doing the film score to Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria was one of the big reasons why I wanted to see this film. If you guessed that, you are correct. But allow me to offer my preconceived notions regarding Thom Yorke doing the score. After having seen the original Suspiria, the first thought in my mind regarding Thom Yorke's score is that Thom Yorke has a lot of big boots to fill in regards to Goblin's original score to Suspiria. Thom Yorke may be famous for Radiohead, but Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria contains the first film score that Thom Yorke has ever composed in his entire music career. And you know what? Thom Yorke's score is great as a standalone experience. Now, much like Luca Guadagnino's intention for how the reimagining looked for Suspiria, Thom Yorke wanted to offer a completely different type of film score than the one that Goblin made before. And this is something I respect Thom Yorke for doing in regards to approaching the composition of the film score of Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. And I know there are Radiohead fans out there that were expecting Thom Yorke's score for Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria to be amazing! Look, I love Radiohead to the point that they are my favorite alternative rock band, as well as one of my favorite bands of all time. But just because I made that point clear doesn't mean that Thom Yorke's score to Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria is perfect. It does not surpass Goblin's score. And the one thing that makes Thom Yorke's score impossible to top Goblin's is his singing. And don't get me wrong, Thom Yorke is a good singer, but whenever he sings in this film, the scenes end up being jarring in terms of tone. At least there is a standout instrumental track during a well-shot, well-choreographed dance scene that actually is a highlight to Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. Honestly, if you ask me, I think Luca Guadagnino could have hired Johnny Greenwood instead of Thom Yorke if he wanted to get someone from Radiohead to do a film score for his reimagined Suspiria. Johnny Greenwood's music is actually capable of working well with a horror film. As I said before, I think Thom Yorke's score for Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria is great as a standalone experience, but mixed in with what is shown, this is the one aspect I am disappointed with when it comes to Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. If there is one thing about Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria that is a major plus in comparison to the original, it is that this film has no overdubbing at all. And I've already stated in my review of Dario Argento's Suspiria that there was obvious dubbing in it because all the cast members were speaking their native languages. And there were some that were speaking Italian, but they were dubbed into English for English-speaking countries. I probably should say this, but Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria features a predominantly female cast, and the cast is great in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. Dakota Johnson is fine, and she just finished playing a lead role in the 50 Shades trilogy as Anna. Long story short, the 50 Shades trilogy is fucking awful, regardless if it's the books or the films. But she went from Anna to Susie Bannion in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. And there is a major contrast between these two performances. This performance is a lot more tolerable than having to suffer with the 50 Shades trilogy. Now, while Dakota Johnson's acting is tolerable in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, her dancing is actually the one thing that was impressive with her performance in this film. But the one actress that was great in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria was Tilda Swinton. She was outstanding. Also, even though I don't put that much value in the Oscars, I do think Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria deserves to be nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. I prefer that this film wins that award. I was that impressed by it. Now, much like Dario Argento's Suspiria, the character that you are meant to follow the most is Susie Bannion in this version as well. And I would say that Madame Blanc is another character worth focusing on as well, which is something that the original didn't really offer much on that particular character. So it's nice that Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria makes that improvement there. But if there's one thing about Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria that I struggled with, it is the plot. Dario Argento's Suspiria was easy to follow, it was simplistic, but it got its story across. Although I think parts of it were rushed. Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria is told in 6 acts, including an epilogue, which was unorthodox in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria's case. This film runs at about 2 hours and 32 minutes, and this is almost an hour longer than the original. As I said earlier in this review, Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria takes its sweet time. I'm also implying that this film is bloated. There are scenes that just drag. Now, while I greatly approve of this reimagining, greatly focusing on the Coven of Witches, this film also detours to focus on a subplot involving a psychologist and his wife. And I never found this subplot that interesting, and it doesn't really mesh well with the overall plot of Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. Not to mention, I found this subplot underwhelming as it finished. And it made me wonder, why even have this subplot in the first place? It just felt unnecessary looking back at it. If this psychologist plotline was removed completely from Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, as well as maybe taking out a couple scenes that connect to it, it really wouldn't change the film all that much. Which makes me wonder, why did this film need to bloat itself with this unnecessary plotline? If there's one thing about my reviews of films that I try not to talk much about, is the climax of a film, because it's at a much later point before the end. Well, with Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, I have to tap into this particular subject matter. Now, some have said that the climax, the end of Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, is complete bonkers. To me, I was left turned off when the climax came in. This is because there is a twist. There is this revelation after a little over 2 hours. And once this particular moment kicked in, I could care less how the rest of the film played off. Not to mention, very shortly after, very questionable slow motion and terrible CG blood. It should have not looked this way as the climax was kicking in. And when the epilogue kicked in, I just wanted Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria to end. If anyone favors Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria over Dario Argento's original 1977 cult horror classic, my reaction is going to be one angry sigh. I'm going to be shooting for a 6 out of 10 for Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. By the way, the blood in my original review of Suspiria was cherry flavored NyQuil. Now you know.